We are on the way in to Mount Vernon, George Washington's Mount Vernon. Admission was $28 plus $2 for a quick house tour. There's a more in-depth one that's, I think it was like $60 if I remember correctly. We're excited to be here. We'll show you around. Okay, we got through. There's security that they check your bags. My bottled water was okay. Nick's Dr. Pepper was not.
No.
So he had to throw that away, but
throw away half a
it's
bottle
all
of
right.
Dr. Pepper. You can't take big bags.
Yeah. Okay, we're coming around the path here, and to our left will be the beautiful vista of the house. And here it is. It's more tan in person. I thought it was going to be white.
Mount Vernon began as a 1.5-story, approximately 3,500 square foot house built in 1734 by George Washington's father, Augustine Washington. George Washington began running Mount Vernon in 1754, and over the next 45 years slowly added on the house to the 21-room, almost 11,000 square foot mansion we see today. The mansion exterior looks like it is stone, but it is actually pine siding boards. They were cut and beveled to resemble stone blocks. After paint was applied to the boards, sand was thrown onto the wet painted wood to create a stone-like finish. This made the mansion look more expensive while also protecting the wood siding boards from the elements. The color you see today replicates the last round of sand painting ordered by Washington in 1796.
On these little sections, it looks like it's sandstone blocks, but that's what he wanted. You can see little wood peeking through. So the guide said every 40 years they have to redo it, and they're doing one side of the house right now, so that's kind of rare that you got to see that with us. So what they do is paint the wood and throw sand on it pretty much to make it look like sandstone blocks.
The first floor contains the more formal parts of the mansion, including the dining rooms, parlors, central hall, and Washington's study. Washington called this room the last addition to the mansion and the grandest space in the house, his new room. Opting for vivid paint and wallpaper through much of the house, Washington made choices that expressed the taste of his era, when the use of bold colors was a sign of wealth. The stunning green of the wallpaper in this room was one of his favorites. Like the grand salons of fashionable 18th century English manners, its high ceilings, large volume, and symmetrical decoration made the space truly impressive, as the room alone was larger than most houses in colonial Virginia. Before the new room was completed, Washington considered the front parlor to be the best place in my house. This elegant room was a public space where visitors enjoyed the Washington family's company. One of the most striking spaces in the mansion, the dining room, is part of the original house built in 1734. In 1785, verdigris green paint was added. Washington believed the color to be grateful to the eye and less likely than other colors to fade. An overcoat of glaze further intensified the color. This bedchamber accommodated some of the many visitors who stopped at Mount Vernon before and especially after George Washington's presidency. According to his diaries, overnight visitors were present in his home about 2/3 of the time. The second floor includes 6 bedrooms, including the Washingtons' personal bedroom. Designed according to Mrs. Washington's suggestion that it be simple and functional, the room was also her sanctuary, where she planned her schedule and wrote letters to family and friends. According to her grandson, she also spent an hour there each day reading the Bible and praying. Washington died of a severe throat infection in this room on December 14, 1799. Upon his death, Martha closed the room and for the remaining several years of her life, spent much of her time in a bedchamber on the 3rd floor. The 3rd floor includes a number of rooms that were used for storage and living space and provides access to the cupola.
For a wealthy man like George Washington, this is a lot of books. Most of these books are nonfiction, they're not stories, although there is one copy of Don Quixote. These books are how George Washington learned. Most of them are about farming and agriculture and ecology and biology. That was his passion. But he only went to school until he was 11 years old. George Washington's father died when he was 11, and the family basically said, he already educated 2 sons. I think that's good enough. We don't really need 3 educated kids. So he was always a little self-conscious that he didn't have a fancy education like some of the other founding fathers. He also only spoke English. He didn't speak any foreign languages. Also, it made him a little self-conscious. Now your next stop is going to be the kitchen.
They're going to begin every day by lighting a fire in that fireplace about 4:30 in the morning. And sometimes that workday for them would not end until well after dark. Now these two rooms behind many of you are important to the kitchen's operation as well. On the left is the larder. That's temporary cold storage. So think root cellar or basement.
Retirement was a little crazy back then. Back then, leaders ruled until the day they died. But George Washington was president for 2 terms, for a total of 8 years. He wanted to show that a leader could lead and then could step down, and the next leader could take over, and the country could keep moving along peacefully. And he did demonstrate that. That's something that we've continued to value for almost 250 years now.
After George Washington's return to Mount Vernon at the end of the Revolutionary War in 1783, the study became his retreat from ever-present family and visitors, a place where he could quietly and privately tend to business. Reportedly, no one was allowed in this room without his invitation. From here, he directed the management of his estate, receiving reports from overseers, making daily diary entries, and posting his accounts. The study was also where Washington bathed, dressed, and kept his clothes. Each morning, he rose between 4 and 5 a.m. and went to the study, using the private staircase that led down from the bedchamber. According to the recollections of his step-grandson George Washington Parke Custis, he lit his own fire and dressed himself. Washington used this quiet time to write letters or review reports until breakfast at 7 a.m., after which he usually rode out to his farms. In the evening, unless he had a social obligation or lingered talking to visitors after dinner, he returned to the study to read or confer with his secretary until around 9 p.m. when he went to bed.
The stable still smells like the stables. Still smell the manure and the horses and stuff. This is the dung repository, pretty much where all the horse manure and waste would be composted. So this is the first known structure in the United States devoted to composting. This is the ice house. What a nice view from the ice house. Look at that. Filling the ice house was a challenging task. When the Potomac River froze over in the winter, all available enslaved workers were needed to cut as many blocks of ice as possible before temperatures warmed and the river thawed. The blocks were dragged from the riverbank up the hillside and then packed into the well. So this is the hillside that they had to be dragged up. And then packed into this house that went deep in there. There's a 10-foot ladder down there. You just saw the old burial vault, and that's where Martha and George Washington were buried. Their coffins were just placed on a table with the cloth over them, and then within a few years, the coffin had already started deteriorating. So they were moved to this new vault in 1831, so I'm not sure what they did for those 30 years. The tour didn't really say anything about that, if the coffin was already deteriorating in 2 years after he was buried there, and they moved here like 30 years later to this new one that we're going to come up upon.
In 1799, this estate was home to a community of 317 enslaved men, women, and children who had no choice but to live here. Most of these enslaved people lived and worked on the 4 outlying farms as agricultural laborers. About 1/4 of the population worked here on Mansion House Farm as skilled laborers such as blacksmiths, carpenters, spinners, and seamstresses. In his will, Washington provided for the freedom of the 123 individuals he owned, effective upon Mrs. Washington's death. She freed them early on January 1st, 1801. The remaining 194 people, whether dower or rented slaves, remained enslaved after the deaths of General and Mrs. Washington. There are no records that document the number of enslaved or free African Americans who are buried in this cemetery. From oral histories and a handful of early 19th century visitor accounts, estimates range from 100 to 150 people. Among those individuals thought to be interred here is William Lee, George Washington's personal servant during the Revolutionary War, who was granted freedom and an annuity in Washington's will. In 2014, a multi-year archaeological survey began in order to better understand the cemetery size and organization, and to find out how many people were laid to rest on this hilltop.
So there aren't any markers or anything of the enslaved people that were buried here, except these, if you can see on the ground, there's like string rectangles. I think that's where the sites are. You can see one right here in front of you. There's a few right there. Here's a memorial. Captain John Smith, the first known European to encounter the Potomac watershed, arrived in 1608 and found an area inhabited by 3 Indian tribes. The abundance of wildlife, fertile soil, and navigable water contributed to the area's colonization by European settlers. We know from early 17th century documentation that the Potomac River and its tributaries were sources for incredible stocks of seafood. Colonists described schools of fish so dense that a boat could not move through them. 14-inch oysters were also common. So this Pioneer Farm is all a replica. There wasn't really a farm here on this land that we're walking on right now. It was actually a swamp. We created a little farm area here, kind of represent all the farmland that he had. There was 8,000 acres. Now the Ladies Association, who owned it since 1858, owns like 400. So if you imagine how big that area is. The buildings up ahead, they're all just replicas. All of this was swamp. There was nothing here. I don't know if you can hear me because it's really windy. This is not the original The original greenhouse burnt down in 1835. The present structure was rebuilt on the original site in 1951. So sit a little bit under this old, beautiful magnolia tree. I think these are all magnolias back there. Just taking a little walk around the pathways around the greenhouse. The garden is coming to the end. It's the end of October, so everything's pretty much done, but the light is pretty right now, coming through the trees. Look at that okra. There's some grapevines. Look at the beautyberry. Pomegranates. Gomphrena, calendula, peonies in here. Look at that celosia. And we come around the front here with the citrus in the pots. This is an orange right here. Can you imagine having a greenhouse like this? What a dream. Love the espaliered fruit trees on this west-facing side of the building where it's warmer for them. Probably a whole zone warmer. It's a beautiful spot to sit right here under this old magnolia. Can't imagine how beautiful the scent is when the flowers are in bloom. Look at that big trunk. You see the house peeking through. That's a pretty shot. That was a little walkthrough of the gardens by the greenhouse. I think these are life-size statues of how tall they were, because Martha was 4'11" and I'm 5'2", so the statue is just a little bit shorter than me, and he was 6'3". Looks like there's a little tree farm or something right here.
Washington has 5 farms with 3,200 acres they're actively working. And so this shop was set up specifically to maintain the farming equipment. Now, Martin's working on some parts for a gate. It's going to be the pickle.
The two-story piazza is the mansion's most distinctive architectural feature. Extending the full length of the back of the house, it also has a practical function, catching the river breezes on a hot and humid Virginia day. The Washingtons treated the piazza as an outdoor room, serving afternoon tea here to visitors and family members seated in simple Windsor chairs. From the piazza, visitors observe a wooded area, which was an 18-acre deer park. This was a common feature on large estates of the time. Washington stocked his with tame deer from nearby and from England for the delight of family and visitors. The trees between the mansion and the river were carefully pruned to emphasize the view of the Potomac, creating a so-called hanging wood.
This is actually from George Washington. This is 1785. He died in 1799.
Tulip poplar surfacing. What?
I did not realize that these are this old.
It's like 250 years old.
Yeah.
So we're gonna leave George Washington's house soon. It's gonna close in 15 minutes. Look, you can see the house right there. Oh, so cool.
What a perfect day. It's like perfect temperature. It was a little bit chilly in the morning, but right now it's like perfect.
It's 71, completely clear skies and warm and sunny.
And there's a little breeze.
And people were gone for like past few hours, I think.
Yeah, there's like nobody here in
yeah.
the evenings. Everybody comes here for the morning about like 2, and then like we just walk around for an hour by ourselves.
You wanna jump? You You wanna jump?